Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Unique Device Identification, Aligning to a Single Approach, presented by Mark Agostino, who is a senior GMP expert here at Redica Systems. If you have any questions, please use the chat feature, and we will have a QA section at the end of today's presentation. Once we were done, I'll send out a copy of the slides we're going over today, as well as answers to all the questions we received and a recording of the webinar. Before we begin, I want to quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Taylor Minks, and I am the marketing lead at Redica Systems. Redica Systems is a technology company using data, analytics, and expertise to deliver meaningful insights to quality and safety professionals around the world. By applying artificial intelligence to large and disparate government data sets, Redica Systems empowers its customers to improve compliance, increase product quality, and build a more efficient organization. Founded in 2010, Redica Systems serves over 200 customers in the pharma, medical device, and food industries, including 19 of the top 20 pharma companies and 9 of the top 10 medical device companies. Today's presenter, Mark, is a GMP medical device expert at Redica Systems. He has over 20 years of experience as a quality assurance and regulatory affairs professional working in the medical device and pharmaceutical industries. He has experience working with project teams and in senior management roles toward delivering medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and combination products to worldwide market. Mark plays an essential role in helping build and analyze data for Redica's medical device model. In addition to his role here at Redica, he is the managing director of QARA Biomed based in the Netherlands. And now I'll pass it on to Mark to start today's webinar.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Taylor. So welcome, everyone. And I'm happy to have you join here to my discussion around unique device identification, as mentioned by Taylor. So let's get started. So the agenda for the discussion is going to be a high-level overview of the unique device identification. This is more just to give you sort of an idea what is the purpose of UDI, and sort of what's some of the challenges for manufacturers, and just to give sort of a high-level introduction in terms of what is going to be the discussion around UDI and what is it. So, and then we're going to go into the basics of the unique device identifier. Talking about what is it composed of, what's a little bit of the history behind it, and all how it sort of plays into basically the bigger picture around with medical devices. Then we're going to get into sort of the integration of UDI into the QMS. So this is going to be discussing sort of a holistic approach. So where UDI touches on many different functions and areas within a QMS and within an organization. And so understanding what needs to be taken into consideration to effectively integrate UDI within your QMS. And then we're going to talk about the UDI compliance states, particularly around the US FDA and EU, just to give sort of a glimpse in terms of basically where things stand and what you manufacturers are going to need to be able to have to comply to, and what timelines in order to get their products to market within those areas. So and then we're talking about sort of challenges for a company QMS. And so what is it specific to UDI that a company is going to need to be taken into consideration? Just in developing sort of an agile QMS system that basically just has a level of flexibility to account for a lot of the differences we'll discuss from country to country differences, and a lot of the particulars around UDI that you need to take into consideration. And then we'll talk about some key takeaways. So a high-level overview of unique device identification. Essentially, it is or will be enforced as a requirement for all medical devices distributed worldwide. I know a number of the individuals that provide responses to a questionnaire are not really familiar with UDI, so I wanted to give this sort of at least a brief introduction into UDI. So this one it's going to be a requirement, and you have the US FDA, which is actually very progressed basically in integrating UDI as a requirement for almost all medical devices, and they introduced a regulation in 2013, and then basically since 2014 they've been working to get UDI basically as a requirement for all medical devices. They're not quite there yet, but they're much further along than a lot of other countries. And you have some countries that are much further along than others. And you have some countries that haven't even started yet in terms of integrating UDI as as a requirement in their in their regulations. So and also there's constant challenges for manufacturers to understand. I mean, when is the UDI needed on the device? When is it needed on the packaging? To what degrees? To what levels of the packaging? What is the data to be submitted? Where to submit it? How should it be stored? What is this UDI all about? Is really essentially what it comes down to. And then it's just and then as I mentioned before, I mean, UDI will impact multiple functional areas within an organization. And I think that's just something to be just aware as we continue on this presentation. Now into the basics of UDI. So the unique device identifier, so is composed of two parts. So you have the UDI DI and UDI PI. So the device identifier is essentially relates to the specific version or model of a device as well as the device manufacturer. And then the production identifier goes into more of the information related around production, around lot numbers and batch numbers, serial numbers, expiration dates, and maybe even manufacturing dates. And all this stuff can be as a part of some of basically to compose the PI portion of a UDI. And for a UDI, it must be presented in two forms. And then one is a human readable form, as human readable, sort of in their interface, and as well as sort of a machine readable form, which would be a sort of an automatic identification data capture technology. For example, a barcode or a QR code is two means to sort of capture that type of information. To talk about, so what's the difference between a UDI, so a unique device identifier, versus a UDI carrier? So as mentioned previously, the unique device identifier is composed of two parts. You have the UDI DI and the UDI PI, basically that which composes the unique device identifier. Now the image to the right is actually is what is called the UDI carrier. So this is what it would be affixed to a device in our packaging. And see, as you can see, there is a machine readable and a human readable form that has this requirement, as well as basically what the numbers represent is sort of the device identifier, as well as the production identifier information that would need to be incorporated as part of the UDI. Now to talk a little bit about just the history of basically of unique device identification is what is the aspects that is meant to compose of a system for a UDI. And I point you to basically to a guidance here, the IMDRF guidance in 2013 for UDI guidance for unique device identification of medical devices. So IMDRF is actually the International Medical Device Regulatory Forum. So actually, this forum is actually composed of a number of regulatory authorities, namely US FDA, EU, China, Japan, Brazil, and they all they got together to basically develop a guidance for a harmonized, aligned approach to UDI across countries. So essentially, just to develop sort of a framework that all the countries can agree upon to sort of develop their systems and their processes to manage UDI, and also to help sort of manufacturers as they're distributing product on a global scale that they're not dealing with a number of different, country-specific issues and just in regard to UDI. So helping to sort of develop that harmonized approach. So in order to do that, they discussed about basically developing the development of UDI using globally accepted standards to help sort of standardize that approach. And to talking about the application of the UDI on the label, being composed of sort of the UDI, DI, and PI. And then the submission of this appropriate information to a UDI database. And so this, we'll talk a little bit more, further in the presentation around the database, but each country is going to have its own UDI database, which will document basically or categorize the devices that are in the market for each of those individual countries. So fundamental concepts of a globally harmonized UDI system, as mentioned, I mean, the UDI and the UDI carrier are going to be based upon standards. A UDI applied to a medical device anywhere in the world should be able to be used globally to meet the UDI requirements for if it's a regulatory authority, essentially just to develop that harmonized, aligned approach for UDI across various countries. And then to say, I mean, the national or local identification numbers should not be used, and that goes, would go against the idea of sort of standardization, so that would make sense. And then regulatory authority should not specify a procedure for modifying the UDI standards. Again, that would go against the principle of helping to standardize or develop a level of alignment around the requirements and the regulations governing UDI on a global scale. And then the UDI database, core elements should not be modified. And then essentially every medical device needs to be identified by UDI unless it is exempted. That goes to the principle basically that eventually every medical device is going to need to be, you can have a unique device identifier. So what are the benefits of a UDI? So the benefits of UDI, I mean, one is traceability. I mean, you have the ability now to identify your device, through the supply chain, all the way from manufacturing up to the point of use. So that the traceability aspect is definitely a nice added feature, and it definitely, as we read on here, I mean, it helps to address, identification of the medical devices through distribution and use. Again, kind of being able to understand where all these devices are in your supply chain, and if they're distributors or importers, or basically if they're in a clinical setting and so forth, you have a means in which to identify where it's at, and then that's through this technology. And then now getting most importantly, getting into sort of the identification of medical devices when it relates to adverse events or field safety corrective actions. So when you're dealing with the customer complaints or serious adverse events or even recalls, it now provides a mechanism by which not only you can identify where it is, but also you quickly sort of react and to any product quality issues that might be happening with your device out in the field, and be able to really develop a means to sort of to react to this in an effective manner, to basically to recall devices, or at least track and identify where these devices are, so you can quarantine them or basically or stop them from being used if product quality issues have been identified. Also, it's also means to reduction of human medical errors. I mean, you're developing sort of an automated system by which you're just reducing the human element. So that would help basically, with the elimination of any transcribing of information that would relate to identifying the device. Now it all could be done through basically either a barcode technology or a QR code technology to capture that information. And then also just the benefits also documenting and capturing of data on the medical devices. I mean, there's a lot of information that would be captured within within the UDI that actually that's another added benefit basically for adopting this technology for medical devices. So why the need for a unique device identification system? So this goes into a little bit what we discussed, previously around the benefits, but just the FDA, US FDA clearly points out, patient safety, improving patient safety, modernizing device post-market surveillance, and facilitating medical device innovation is what they sort of accentuate as sort of their benefits for having such a system. I mean, this is all getting into, basically, like I said, just helping to address product quality issues and then patient safety issues that exist out in the field, and be able to proactively and not proactively but reactively basically to develop effective ways to address those situations in a timely manner. And the same thing with EU MDR. EU MDR talks about post-market safety-related activities for devices to being enhanced, and which is owing to improved incident reporting and targeting and field safety corrective actions, and improving monitoring by competent authorities. This all gets into basically sort of the trending and the tracking of these information. So the incident reporting is, as you incorporate UDI information, you can now better hone in on the types of devices that are problematic, and you can identify, specific lots of devices that out there in the marketplace that actually that might be problematic. So that's sort of where the regulators are going, is really to basically to help provide more data and more information to help deal with these sort of post-market issues that could occur. So talking about the databases. So the two databases here is, one is the Global Unique Device Identification Database, which is utilized by the US FDA. And this basically serves as a catalog for every device with a UDI that is marketed within the United States. And this database here contains only the device identifier information. So that would be just the device model, it is a model and version, as well as the device manufacturer. but then then UDAMED is not fully active as of yet. The UDI module is active as of this past October. So 3 of the 6 modules are active. Then the remaining 3 I think intend to be active by come this year. So that actually will be fully up and running. But as in terms of information that actually just that we need to be provided, I point you to basically to Part A and Part B of Annex 6 of EU MDR and EU IVDR. So this is just to be familiar with that type of information that's going to need to be provided, as you're going to need to prepare sort of the submissions, which we'll talk in the next slide. Yeah. So here, the slide is meant to basically provide you just with a lot of information and guidance, and just related to it, helping to prepare for your submissions for the information to these databases. I think one benefit for the US FDA is actually that it has a UDI that's been established for a while, and a database that's been in existence for a period of time. So there's also a great deal of UDI guidance documents and resources that are available to manufacturers. Then we just need to obviously work with the FDA accredited issuing agencies. We'll talk about issuing agencies a little bit further down the presentation, but the one important thing is you need to establish select an issuing agency, and basically as relates around the physical labeling of your UDI on your device and or packaging. So, and then you need to establish standard operating procedures to manage this information, record this information, and you have a website here that I provide a link to, basically, that has all this information in regards to basically what we need to be done to prepare for submission into the US FDA database. Yeah. But then you have UDAMED, which actually has provided a very nice UDI user guide. So it's a comprehensive user guide that will take your manufacturer through all the process, and ultimately to prepare basically a submission into the UDAMED database. So I encourage you to take a look at that, because that's actually it's a very nice resource to have if you're planning to obviously to market your product in the EU. Now we're going to talk about sort of integration of UDI into the QMS. So one thing to mention is just you need to develop sort of a holistic plan for implementing UDI into the QMS. By that, I mean it's the UDI is going to touch upon a number of different functional areas through your QMS, and these are some of the areas for your consideration. I mean, you have design development, production, post-market surveillance, then getting into relating around responsibilities for economic operators, and as well as how that relating to your supply chain, and then ultimately just the documentation and records that would need to exist, and the type of information that they would need to be in that basically to support your UDI. And then one thing about the documentation of records is going to be touching upon sort of some of the key elements that need to be linked together in relation to your QMS, the data and supporting of the data that's contained within your UDI, and as well as sort of the labels that actually are going to exist upon either the device and or packaging that's going to contain that data and information for the identifying of the device. So, and then another document, the guidance I'll encourage you to take a look at is the MDCG guidance 2021-19. So this is actually, and it talks about sort of how to integrate UDI within your organization's quality management system. So some of the aspects that they encourage you to basically to take consideration is sort of an analysis of expectations and needs of the different stakeholders. This would be your economic operators. So economic operators would be everything from your device manufacturers, your distributors, your importers, and for EU MDR, that also would include authorized representatives. Then you take into consideration healthcare institutions and professionals, patient users, and insurance providers. And then you also do an analysis of the relevant issuing entity standards. So when we talk about the issuing entities, they all have their own standards and own requirements for basically for UDI and identification. So and then obviously later on, so your choice and your selection of the designated issuing entity to basically for your UDI. And then another aspect needs to be definitely well documented and well understood, so as the definition of internal responsibilities for the implementation and subsequent management of the plan. Understanding that UDI is going to touch upon a number of different functional areas within your organization. It's understanding who's going to be responsible for what information and the management of that information all the way through the product lifecycle. And then another thing that's recommended is just to maybe developing methods and use cases to sort of to verify continuous compliance of your UDI related QMS processes. So to have a sort of a continuous, somewhat internal audit and internal check to make sure that you are maintaining that level of compliance. So first area to talk about is design development. I mean, in this area, you can be it's going to be encouraged to sort of create your UDI in compliance with the rules of the issuing entities. I mean, start early on basically thinking about your UDI and your design development of your medical device or IVD. So just then you would just need to decide on basically whether actually the assigning of the UDI would be to the device in itself, or basically and to what levels of packaging would also need to include the UDI. And then one thing needs to be just understood is the development of those UDIs prior to placing the device on the market or submitting technical documentation for regulatory clearance or approval. So this is something that, like I said, the sooner you're able to work through a list of questions or requirements, the better, and the more you be setting up for not having any delays or issues when it comes to time for doing any regulatory submissions. But it's so in addition to the traceability, also you might need to consider an appropriate level of product serialization. And this would be a function of basically as you go through your risk management process, if it's actually deemed necessary. And for EU MDR and as well as the US FDA for active implants, it is deemed to be necessary to have a serialization component of your PI. So it's but not necessarily it's a requirement for all devices, but that is up to basically to the manufacturer to decide if they feel that they want that level of traceability to exist. Then they can so choose to have it included. But one of the important things is just to understand the impact of any potential changes to DI, to your DI, and the necessary reporting to regulatory authorities. As you go through and if you have any understanding those design changes that might affect the DI could cause possible issues with the product there, and then you just need to understand because also just the necessary reporting to regulatory authorities in light of these changes need to be made to the DI because of potential design changes and so forth. So now just talking around UDI issuing agencies. So the US FDA and EU MDR, they have 3 shared accredited issuing agencies. So you have GS1, HIBCC, and ICC-BBA. So I provided so the links to each of these 3 accredited issuing agencies. One thing you got to keep in mind is that each of these issue agencies have their own standards and requirements. So I just provide just a quick snapshot just to show that the device identifier and production identifier informations will follow different formats. And so, also the example to the right with the GS1 issuing agency is just to give you an idea of the type of information that they would provide. And it seems to be relatively straightforward, but where the HIBCC and the ICC-BBA actually do have a lot more possibilities for information and requirements for some of that information. So so that they provide a lot more details around lot number and BC and batch information and so forth that would be as part of those standards. If you want, it's going to be a function of basically what is going to work well in your production environment. So if you want to have more information than what is actually the GS1 is just requiring, then you can look into that to see if that's something that would actually work well in your production environment that's basically for UDI. So, but with that, there's also going to be challenges given these differences with these issuing agencies. And so like to talk about, so one of the QMS challenges with the issue agencies is as you can see, it's just not all issue agencies are recognized by all countries. And so as you can see, the GS1 is pretty standard, across all the countries here that I mentioned. And is pretty much pretty well accepted, because it is basically, it is very straightforward sort of, in terms of the requirements. But like I said, if you choose to use one of the other agencies, just then do take into consideration that not all countries actually will recognize these issue agencies for your device. So that's one thing just to keep in mind when you choose your issuing agency. So, and then it's something that it would need to be just understood and basically reflected in your QMS as a result of that. So to talk around production, so in production, you have the manufacturers should decide when, where, and how the UDI carrier should be applied, and so I think that's so that's only manufacturing, but also that would be a function of regulatory and development and other functions that actually would need to decide on should the UDI be placed on the device, because one, obviously, if space allows and if actually to meet the compliance, you might need to put on the device. But if not, then you could put it on the packaging. But then what levels of packaging are going to need to require the UDI? So I think that's something you just need to investigate. Then the US FDA, actually, for all device risk classes, with the exception of certain class 1 devices, are expected to have a UDI marking on the device. And it's the US FDA is by far the most mature process for UDI. I mean, they've already implemented a lot of not only a lot of guidance but a lot of regulations governing the types of devices that you need to incorporate a UDI marking on the device if it allows. So, but things also to take into consideration here is also from a production standpoint is make sure you incorporate your UDI labeling requirements into a device master records, and so that's one thing. Just make sure that you establish your UDI labeling requirements and make sure that they're actually reflected in the correct documentation, and then include inspection and verification of UDI and device history records. And so, and another aspect is just important just to recognize and be aware of. And then obviously then to identify your owners to manage the PI data for the UDI. So be helping to sort of eliminate any confusion or challenges with the managing of the data is to help to establish that framework up front. And another important aspect for UDI is also in regards to labeling. Not necessarily what much I'm saying here is unique to UDI. I mean, making sure all the systems essentially are verified and validated. But it's actually just important that basically that this UDI process is going to need to be validated and well established within your manufacturing process. And then obviously then is to just make sure you establish those UDI labeling requirements is important. And so part of the reason I'm saying this is just as I've taken a look at the FDA 43 observations related to UDI. So taking a look at a lot of there's been probably since 2014 till now, there's been over 100 observations that have been the FDA has made. So 43 observations that they made. So, and I just here just to provide a list of some of those types of 43 observations, and just to give you a sort of a glimpse of basically what is the FDA identifying through their inspections. One of the more prevalent ones is sort of the device history record does not include or refer to a location of a UDI. So just so that so it just speaks to basically just not having clearly identified a UDI within your records there. So basically when they've gone through and done an inspection, and this is important from the standpoint obviously as you do complaint investigations or investigations of product quality issues. I mean, you're going to go to your device history record for that specific lot, and if there's no UDI information, then it starts to become a challenge in terms of basically helping to correspond one-to-one in terms of issues out in the field to basically the supporting manufacturing documentation. And then actually, as I mentioned, so complaint, and then you have complaint investigations do not include UDI. So you have also on the other end, basically your complaint investigation, it's expectation to have the UDI does not have it. Doesn't, so you don't have, you have the device, you might have what the device is, but no basically identifying information of to help identify what lots or what particular version of the device is actually is in question. So another issue is sort of an illegible UDI label. This goes into sort of the inspection and verification processes that need to be conducted correctly, and then this has been identified in a number of instances as being from inspections as manufacturers having illegible UDI labels. And then the UDI is not carried throughout the distribution. So that means basically the data and the records that should contain the UDI information or reflect the UDI information is from manufacturing does not make it all the way through the supply chain, and either to distributors, to importers, or basically or all the way up to the end use. So that's something that the FDA has identified as an issue. And no UDI labeling inspections. I think that's I think that's been called on a number of instances. It's just there's no specifications or requirements to basically for the UDI label that's been called out on any production documentation or any device master records or so forth. And then no UDI process validation. In some instances, I mean, the process validation has not been conducted. So so if there's issues with the UDI that's been identified out in the field, I mean, then they can point it back to basically not having a validated process there. So that's another area where the FDA has called out issues from with manufacturers. And the last thing is just it's failure to maintain records, and just it's so I guess that this is, I mean, as mentioned, this does touch upon a number of different areas that have the FDA has called out as being problematic in relation to UDI. Just from complaint handling to production with device history records to device master records, inspections and so forth, and ultimately just document management. And then it's a number of different areas have actually have been called up by the FDA through the years as being problematic in relation to UDI. So the next area to touch upon is sort of post-market surveillance. Similar to the US FDA and going to EU MDR and EU IVDR, the following required documentation of UDI, it's UDI information. So this is in relation to like post-market surveillance and vigilance reports, serious incident reports, field safety corrective actions, customer complaints. These are items that we've already sort of touched upon, but just to give you an idea that this the information of UDI is important, is also expected to be part of these reports. So especially as part of quality issues have occurred over time, that they're expecting these vigilance and these post-market surveillance and vigilance reports to have this type of information to help with trending and identifying and any issues related to your device. And so so that's, and then the benefits of a UDI for post-market surveillance. I mean, now you're getting into traceability, which has already been described, but also it's in a little bit we've touched upon previously is just response time to adverse events, containment, response time to address recalls, and field safety corrective actions. I mean, the more information and data you have at your fingertips is basically to identify where devices exist and when product quality issues have been identified, basically how to basically develop the issues of containment and basically so that these product quality issues do not propagate. So the next area to touch upon is sort of responsibilities for economic operators. And as I mentioned, economic operaters are anything from device manufacturers, importers, distributors, potentially authorized representatives for EU MDR. So manufacturers, like I said, touched upon, they're responsible for assigning the UDI assignment and the placement on the UDI carrier, either on the device or packaging. Any initial submissions or updates by identifying information or otherwise device data elements in the UDAMED and or basically the US FDA database. And then the relevant database record, within 30 days of any changes made to any data elements that are required as part of for submissions for these UDI databases. The responsibilities of other economic operators is just you have distributors and and importers are actually and the intent is to verify that the UDI that has been signed by the manufacturer is correct. So in a number of instances, they will actually request the appropriate documentation from the manufacturer to basically to check and confirm this. So they want to make sure that basically everything from what is being manufactured is truly reflected on what has been the devices that reside in their facilities. And then ultimately the goal is to have all economic operators and health institutions to store and keep electronic means of UDI for these devices. So that is one of the end goals. So now we talk about sort of supply chain. So from a supply chain standpoint, it's understanding the roles and responsibilities in the management and reporting of UDI is critical. I mean, that goes, so it goes without saying. I mean, from the supply chain perspective, you're ensuring UDI is managed, throughout, the supply chain, straight from manufacturing all the way to the end use of the patient or whoever they happens to be the end user. And then you want to make sure that documentation in support of the UDI is maintained throughout the whole process as well. I mean, it's all starts with basically when the device, the label is assigned is attached to either the device and or the packaging, and all that supporting documentation that resides in all the records there from manufacturing, and basically tracked in all the way through the process, and then all appropriate levels of packaging have a UDI as needed. So I think one of the most important parts of all this is obviously documentation. I mean, it's everything we sort of touch upon is sort of the documentation and records. So the management of UDI is essentially the culmination of three key aspects, and that is, the data, the labels, and the QMS. I mean, the data is the information that is contained in the records to designate the correct UDI and is communicated to the appropriate UDI databases. So the data is basically the single source of truth there for basically around what is the UDI information related to the device. Then you have the labels. I mean, that's the physical assignment of the UDI and basically the placement of the UDI carrier on the device and all the packaging. And so and make sure that this information is to accurately represent the device when necessary. So and then you have the QMS, which is all the processes and procedures that exist to support the necessary actions for the UDI system. This is everything that to help sort of govern what all the functions need to be responsible for, how the data is supposed to be managed, maintained, communicated. That's all really going to be related through your QMS. And so these three elements here are just basically just important as basically is the three sort of points of truth for basically for UDI for your device. So UDI compliance dates. So typically talking around the FDA. I mean, here it's, as you can see, just they started in September of 2014, and now they're all they're pretty much all have all the requirements and established for basically for everything except certain class 1 devices and unclassified devices. So it's that's going to be done by September 2022. But to point out, it's a long process. I mean, they started in September 2014. You're talking about September 2022, and it's taken them 8 years to get to this point. So they're obviously they're much further along than in other countries, but it takes a long time to get to this point. So for EU MDR and IVDR and UDI compliance dates, and the only one that's been effective is actually of this past May for implantable devices and class 3 devices. So essentially high risk devices. So it's but then the timeline for that is still going to extend out all the way through to May 2027, which is more than 5 years from now. So this whole process is actually it takes a fair bit of time to get enacted for within a certain regulatory authority. So to go into sort of basically around the challenges for a company QMS. So as we just discussed in terms of like sort of the compliance timelines for the EU and the FDA, you have timelines of basically that vary across the world. I mean, it's so the enforcement of a UDI on the device is going to vary significantly from country to country. So this is just a small sample. These are just 4 countries, but the intent of this is just to show you sort of the disparity of a little bit around the timelines and the sort of the challenges as an organization that you're going to need to be made aware of. Actually, looking to market your device in each of these different regions around the world. So it's this is what this is going to sort of forces you. It forces your QMS to remain agile, to be able to market these devices, as well as not only the QMS but also your production environment, and as well as your marketing and other folks are going to need to be aware of basically these requirements because because you have, for instance, you have Brazil here, which is not going to be starting to enact UDI enforcement until 2024, and until 2027. So I mean, it's again they're still a couple of years out, and then until they start getting things enacted, which is still going to be 5 years out, and then again, you have other examples here where other countries have already started to implement elements of this. I mean, you have Saudi Arabia, which has already done, already has enforcement for high-risk devices over this past August. But as you go through and you look at various countries around the world, you're going to see that some countries haven't even started yet, and so it's and yes, it's going to be it's just an interesting challenge, and so it's just going to force basically just manufacturers to plan appropriately as it relates to basically these UDI requirements. Another challenge for your QMS and for an organization is going to be device nomenclature. So you have the European Medical Device Nomenclature, the EMDN code, that's going to be utilized by EUDAMED. But then you have the Global Medical Device Nomenclature, which is going to be a nomenclature that is currently used by the US FDA for their database. So that's so you're going to have a little bit of a difference between the EU and the US FDA, but you're also going to have other countries that are all going to adopt different nomenclature as well. So and it's they can adopt either an EMDN, a GMDN, a national specific system, or none at all. So that is something you got to be aware basically around the nomenclature for these devices, and this becomes a challenge because when you start to gather information for post-market activities and identifying, complaints and issues that have been, logged into these databases, then you just got to be really aware of these differences in order to help us sort of assessing your product as it's been distributed to all these different markets. So with that being said, I guess just talking about some key takeaways. Is that one is to develop a QMS that is agile for managing UDI throughout the device product lifecycle. That's not only the different functions, but also just the flexibility of all the different requirements from country to country, and just being aware that of those differences and be able to plan appropriately. And one thing is promote awareness and understanding the differences from country to country where you intend to market. I guess this will involve, a number of different functions getting into from, you have your marketing, your production, your regulatory folks that are all going to have to understand these differences and these impacts from from country to country. Then understand that the regulatory landscape for medical devices worldwide for the UDI is constantly evolving. So, just as you can see, is that there's a lot of elements that are still yet to be enacted in various countries, and that you're going to have to, that this UDI platform is going to be constantly evolving as more countries start to enact changes, and maybe even if they start to impose any delays or things that are going to impact your ability to do business. That's to meet in order to be UDI compliant. I think that's going to be one of the ongoing challenges for medical device manufacturers. I think what you need to do is is to create sort of regulatory or production strategies to effectively react to the different requirements and enforcement timelines of the countries where you're intending to market. That's so essentially try to establish a platform or working documents where you can you assess the stuff on an ongoing basis, so you can effectively plan and react and plan basically as you need to, just to correspond to these different requirements and enforcement timelines. So with that being said, I just want to thank you for your attention. So
Well, thank you, Mark. That was a great presentation. Now it's time for our Q&A section of today's webinar. Go ahead and type up any questions you have. We've already had a few come in during the presentation. And just as a reminder for everyone, you will be receiving a copy of these slides. So you'll be able to check out some of the links that Mark pointed out. And you'll also get a recording of today's presentation. So for starters, Mark, our first question is UDI mandatory or a choice for pharma companies?
Yeah, I guess it's a choice. I mean, it's so where pharma would be probably would be most impacted would be related around if they have a combination product, and so if they if their combination product and that device constituent would necessitate a UDI, then that's something that they would need to take into consideration. But again, that would relate around the device portion of it. So from pharma, from that's where pharma could be impacted by this regulation, or by UDI, I should say.
Okay, thank you. And then what is the difference between UDI and serialization?
Yeah, so I guess as I pointed out in the presentation, I mean, serialization is going to be sort of a component of the UDI PI. I mean, the UDI is the unique device identifier, which is a composition of the UDI DI and the UDI PI. The serialization would come into play, like particularly if around the PI portion of it. And like I said, that's is a requirement sort of for active implantable devices, so you have very high risk devices. But it can be a choice by the manufacturer if they want to incorporate it for other device risk classes as well. But it's not necessarily as a requirement.
Good to know. Okay, thank you. Next question. The mandatory implementation of UDI for manufacturers and distributors in the US now seems firm for 2023. Who is lobbying against practitioner implementation, and who lobbied for emergency use of UDI exclusions?
I guess to be honest, I don't who lobbied. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm not aware of the top of my head around who lobbied for this information. So we can take that back as something we can definitely look into as and provide a response. But I can't say off the top of my head who actually was lobbying for that.
For sure. For that question, we will get back to you guys. Let's see what is next. Okay, this one's pretty lengthy. Digitization offers potential benefits to all stakeholders. US manufacturers and distributors have spent millions implementing UDI. Why has the uptake of use of UDI by US providers been so slow? There's a little bit more to this. FDA does not regulate practice. How can industry and others accelerate US UDI implementation beyond distribution? UDI would have helped stop unregulated PPE during COVID and beyond.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, the technology does exist. Yeah, so why not use it? And I think that's I think the regulators recognize obviously the benefit. I mean, that's why they've been instituting a lot of the UDI platform, particularly the US FDA has been sort of front at the forefront of a lot of this. I think to why more health institutions are not adopting stuff. I think it's going to be I think a lot of this stuff has been in discussions, and why it's not been enacted, I guess, is that it all comes down to a lot of it is cost, time, and resources. I mean, and it's not necessarily a good reason, but I think it's also doing something new and doing something different. So I think that's sort of the getting over that training or that training part of it, and basically, and it is really going to be important, and basically, and then making people aware sort of the benefits of it is going to be just as is going to sort of help to sort of drive sort of that innovation and that adoption by those various institutions.
Thank you. Great answer. Okay. The second to last question we have: would manufacturers and other stakeholders engaged in combination products have a greater incentive to serialize given the complexity of the Drug Supply Chain Security Act on products which are pharma MOA, which is mechanisms of action, device component complexities not captured by lot?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, that's serialization is not exclusive to like active implantables, but it is an option that basically that a manufacturer has to basically incorporate as part of the UDI. That's the UDI PI specifically. So that is something that can be, if you find through your risk management process that is something that is you're identifying as a risk to your product, then yeah, then I would fully go for looking at the issuing agencies and adopting, looking at basically adopting a serialization component that is going to be in the benefit of, as you described, the device constituent of your combination product. So absolutely.
Sweet. Okay, last question, and this deals with the quality system. Where have you seen a majority of UDI issues in a quality system in relation to a medical device manufacturer? Any major challenges when thinking about combination device or biologics prefer pre-filled syringe products?
So with in terms of the QMS, I think that's yeah, I think where I personally have seen these issues. I mean, it's a lot of it is getting into I guess the establishment of the UDI and identifying where it should be, where it should be affixed. I mean, it's a lot of some manufacturers are reluctant to put it on the device because then that takes away space for other symbols and other issues. And then also it might be this, being the nature of the device, it might not necessarily allow for the UDI carrier to be affixed. But then when does it stop in terms of the levels of packaging that you need to be, that the UDI carrier is also going to need to be affixed to? So I think that's one of the constant challenges is really just understanding that landscape of basically where needs to be where the UDI needs to be affixed to in terms of the device as well as the packaging. And especially as you get into combination in biologics, because now you have other elements there which which you just need because there's other labeling and other requirements there for them that you just need to take consideration. But specifically as it relates around the device portion of that's one of the main issues I've seen is just is the challenges really is during the design development process is where to fix that label. And from the production process, it gets into a lot of what things have not been verified or checked. That basically has been one thing, and I think that's one thing that the FDA sort of called it as well is things are incorporated in the DHRs and some inspection issues. That's from my experience. That's what I've seen a lot as well with dealing with different medical device manufacturers.
Noted. Thank you for all your insights today. That is the conclusion for our webinar. All questions have been answered so far. Thank you, Mark, for today's presentation. I hope everyone got benefits from it. Again, we will be sharing the presentation with you and the slides, and we hope to see you at the next Redica Systems webinar. Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you, everyone. All right.